Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Evan Wiener. More people are going to come in here. And this goes back a long time. We're going back 130 years. The reason why we're going back 130 years is because the next major holiday in the United States is Juneteenth, June 19th. That's when the slaves in Texas got noticed that the Civil War was over and basically you're on your own now. But America has a very uneasy relationship with the former slaves 30 years later. The Atlanta Compromise, that is Booker T. Washington giving a speech in Atlanta in 1895. Frederick Douglass dies. Frederick Douglass was probably the father of the Civil Rights Movement. The President Grover Cleveland didn't care about racial issues in the United States. In fact, he welcomed the Confederates into the Democratic Party after the Civil War was over. This is Brooklyn. This is an interesting thing because on 39th Street, South Brooklyn, anybody here from Brooklyn? No Brooklynites here. Well, on 39th Street, South in Brooklyn, a recreation of a plantation in Mississippi, roughly around 1845, and you get to pay to see 500 black women, children, and men recreate the plantation life. Meanwhile, there's another thing that's going on, and that other thing that is going on is there's a depression, and it's 2 years into the depression. The depression was caused by tariffs. In 1890, William McKinley, who was a congressman, pushed these tariffs, and it basically sunk the economy back in 1893. Hawaii, there's a revolution. It lasts 2 days in Hawaii. It's Diamond Head where that revolution they attempted to overthrow the government, and it took place right around here in Diamond Head. The Cuban Independence movement starts in earnest in 1895. That will eventually suck America into a war in 1898. X-rays. All of us have had X-rays, right? We've all had X-rays. Well, the first X-rays, by accident, occurred in 1895. You can go to the movies. There's a movie projector available. In 1895, that is the movie projector that was available. There was pro football in Latrobe, Pennsylvania, which was outside, or is outside of Pittsburgh, where they signed a 16-year-old to be a quarterback, first pro player. The first public golf course was in the Bronx, Van Cortlandt Park. Anybody from the Bronx here? Wow, nobody from Brooklyn, nobody from the Bronx. That's odd, but anyway.
From Queens.
You're from Queens. What do we call Manhattan in Queens? The city.
The city, yeah.
The city, right? Anyway, because I spent 4 years, Westchester. I spent 4 years in Queens, but the Van Cortlandt Park golf course opened up, and it's still there all these years later. And the first volleyball team, anybody play volleyball at any time? The first volleyball team, 1895. That was the year that volleyball was invented. So I'm sure at some point somebody went like that, played volleyball. And there was a car race in 1895. You didn't go very fast. And in some cars, you didn't have any brakes. It was like, I hope this thing stops. America the Beautiful, the poem was written in 1895. Oh, beautiful for loving hands that nurture those in need, that stand behind the peace of mind of those of other creeds. America, America, your eagle is my dove. Renounce your greed and plant the seed of brotherhood and love. Part of the poem that was written in 1895. Booker T. Washington. Well, Booker T. Washington became the most important person in the Civil Rights Movement in 1895. Frederick Douglass is on his deathbed. Somebody has to take the mantle, and he decides to do so. On September 18th, the African-American educator and leader Booker T. Washington delivered his Atlanta Compromise speech at the Cotton States and International Exhibition in Atlanta. Although the organizers of the exposition worried that public sentiment was not prepared for such an advanced step to see an African American give a speech, they decided that inviting a black speaker would impress northern visitors with the evidence of racial progress in the South. So here comes Booker T. Washington. 2 years earlier, Booker T. Washington had spoken in Atlanta during an international meeting of Christian workers. That audience was actually comprised of northern and southern whites, responded favorably to a speech in which he advocated vocational industrial education for blacks as a means of improving southern relations. There's been a problem since 1865 and the end of the Civil War. Congress is taking steps to give African American men the right to vote. African Americans did have some positions in political power after the war, but basically in the South anyway, it's how do we stop these people from voting? How do we stop them? Because we need to stop them. Following the Civil War, which ended in 1865, blacks took on leadership roles. They held public office and sought legislative changes for equality and the right to vote. In 1868, the 14th Amendment to the Constitution gave black people equal protection under the law. In 1870, the 15th Amendment granted black American men the right to vote. Many white Americans, especially those in the South, were extremely unhappy with the developments. The civil rights movement would come to a sudden end in 1877. The Reconstruction period's end started with the Panic or Depression of 1873. If you go through American history in the 19th century, you'll see there were panics or depressions in the early part of the century, 1873, along with 1893, and also minor recessions. The final blow was delivered to Reconstruction in 1876 with the presidential election because nobody knew who won the election between Rutherford B. Hayes and Samuel J. Tilden. Race way too close to call. Democratic and Republican leaders decided we're going to take it out of the hands of the voters and we are going to decide who wins this. Democrats rather easily said to the Republicans, you could have it, you could have the Oval Office, but you need to give us something. Give us something that kind of reconstruct the Old South. The Compromise of 1877, which actually didn't become the Compromise of 1877 officially until some historians said, hey, let's call this the Compromise of 1877. Compromise was reached on January 29, 1877. The Electoral Commission Act established a commission of 5 senators, 3 Republicans, 2 Democrats, 5 representatives, 3 Democrats, 2 Republicans, and 5 Supreme Court justices, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, and 1 independent. And they were going to decide which votes to count, which they weren't going to count, and they're going to resolve the dispute. The independent Supreme Court justice refused to serve on the commission and was replaced by a Republican, which kind of meant that the Republicans are going to say, yeah, Hayes is our guy, but let's talk about it. And there was Rutherford B. Hayes, who would become the President of the United States. Hayes initially did not want the support of the commission, but he changed his mind because he felt it would enhance the legitimacy of the eventual winner. Commission voted straight on party lines, 8-7 to award the electoral votes from South Carolina, Florida, and Louisiana, and 1 from Oregon, all of them disputed, to Rutherford B. Hayes. Democratic members of Congress threatened to prevent the count of the electoral votes and delay the resolution of the election with frequent adjournments and filibusters. With the threat of that delay, Democrats hoped to win some concessions from the Republicans. The concessions were, let us segregate the South. The political farce of 1876. People knew it was a farce. On February 26th, a small bipartisan group met in Washington's Wormley Hotel. They discussed a potential deal in which Democrats would accept Hayes as president in exchange for support for a Southern transcontinental railroad and the end of Reconstruction. But no decisive agreement was reached. There is an irony of the Wormley Hotel. It was owned by a black man, a free black man, who was one of the big hotel operators in Washington, D.C. at the time. James Wormley was the owner and operator of the Wormley Hotel, which opened in 1869. He was born a free black citizen in 1819 in Washington, D.C. That is the irony. Jim Crow laws would start at the hotel owned by a black man, Wormley. Wormley was the richest African American in Washington, D.C. His hotel became a hub for both local and foreign government officials. Hotel was the site of the Wormley Agreement, which led to the Compromise of 1877 and the election or selection of Rutherford B. Hayes. The end of Reconstruction and the end of rights for blacks in the South took place at an African American man's hotel. It's over, and Rutherford B. Hayes defeats Samuel Tilden. By the way, Samuel Tilden didn't really bother or didn't fight strongly enough to get the presidential or the Oval Office. Tilden was the guy who basically left all of his money, or most of his money, to build the New York Public Library on 42nd Street and Fifth Avenue. That was Tilden. Tilden's choice to stay home was a crucial mistake and not fight, while Hayes' engagement across the aisle, talking both Democrats and Republicans, helped win the day. Hayes' ability to convince his opponents that they could tolerate 4 years of his presidency made it possible for them to concede his victory. And there is Rutherford B. Hayes in the Napoleon stance there, his hand in his jacket. Hayes now had a single vote edge in the Electoral Commission, which gave him a single vote edge in the Electoral College, and he had more votes than Tilden. He got nearly 51% of the vote. The Democrats were furious. All Tilden could do was shrug. It's about what I expected. So he goes home to New York. Two issues interest the Democrats in 1877. Restoring their control of government and thus white supremacy in the South, and removing the last of the federal troops and the federal subsidies for railroads. Probably more that they were able to restore white supremacy than the railroad. However, it is doubtful that Hayes or his supporters and Democrats reached any sort of agreement beyond what Hayes promised in his letter of acceptance. Federal troops leave Louisiana, South Carolina, and also Florida, and the South can go about doing whatever they want to do. Samuel J. Randolph, the Democratic Speaker of the House, realizing creating chaos would backfire on the Democrats, finally ruled the filibusters out of order and forced the completion of the count in the early hours of March 2nd, 1877. Hayes got 185 votes, Tilden 184 in the Electoral College, and that was it. The Rutherford B. Hayes presidency would start basically a day before he was supposed to be sworn in. Compromise of 1877. Mrs. U.S. thanks Mr. Tilden. I had promised to dance this set with Mr. Hayes. This was making fun of the fact that Tilden basically didn't put up much of a fight. Democrats agreed that Hayes would become president in exchange for the withdrawal of federal troops from the South and granting home rule in the South. Do whatever you want, states' rights. Hayes' withdrawal of federal troops from Louisiana and South Carolina marked a major turning point in American political history, effectively ending the Reconstruction era and ushering in the system of Jim Crow. Southern Democrats' promises to protect civil and political rights of blacks were not kept, and the end of federal interference in Southern affairs led to widespread disenfranchisement of black voters. Troops are gone from Florida, Louisiana, South Carolina, but truth is that during the Ulysses Grant presidency, Grant started pulling them out of the South anyway. There's a combination of things. The Depression of 1873, people worried more about money than Reconstruction, and whatever happens in the South, what happens in the South, but get the economy up and going again. Rutherford, or his fraudulency, that's what Rutherford B. Hayes was known as during the 4 years. Hayes had hoped to reconcile the divisions left over from the Civil War and Reconstruction, and it's likely that he genuinely wanted to protect the civil rights of African Americans, but he failed. His removal of the federal troops emboldened white supremacists in the South. The Supreme Court of the United States backed up the Southern Democrats. In 1883, the Supreme Court ruled in the civil rights cases that the public accommodation sections of the Act were unconstitutional, saying Congress was not afforded control over private persons or corporations under the Equal Protection Clause. That is Stone Mountain, Georgia, and that is where the Ku Klux Klan was revived in around 1916, 1917. And the odd thing about Stone Mountain, Georgia, it's a minority-majority city now. Most of the city is African American, and yet they have the statue or the carving in that rock of Confederates. Stonewall Jackson and Robert E. Lee are over there, along with Jefferson Davis. In the Atlanta area, there's always been this, there's been this debate, well, why don't we put Martin Luther King and others on the other side of the rock, but they haven't done that yet. But there's Stone Mountain, Georgia. There was a wave of anti-black laws passed after the Reconstruction. Some of the most common laws included restrictions on voting rights. Many southern states required literacy tests or limited voting to those whose grandfathers also had the right to vote. Other laws banned interracial relationships, while clauses allowed businesses to separate their black and white clientele. So, it's 30 years, and over the 30 years, this is all built up, and Booker T. Washington is selected to give a talk in 1895 about race relations in Atlanta, Georgia. Born into slavery on April 5th, 1856 in Halesford, Virginia, Washington was freed when U.S. troops reached the area during the Civil War. Booker T. Washington worked his way through Hampton Normal and Agricultural Institute and attended college at Wayland Seminary. In 1881, he was named the first leader of the new Tuskegee Institute in Alabama, an institute for black higher education. Beginning in 1890, Booker T. Washington was the primary leader in the African American community and of the contemporary black elite. In Atlanta, Washington stated that African Americans should accept disenfranchisement and social segregation as long as white people allow them economic progress, educational opportunity, and justice in the courts. That was not accepted all that well by people like W.E.B. Du Bois, who was young and up and coming in the civil rights movement, 1895. And there is Booker T. Washington, who gave that talk. Booker T. Washington stressed the importance of hard work and gradual progress for blacks. He said that blacks should cast down their buckets in agriculture rather than try to grow into politics and make friends with whites who can help them. Some black leaders called the speech the Atlantic Compromise, believing that Washington had compromised their civil rights unnecessarily. Booker T. Washington asked whites also to cast down their buckets and hire black workers rather than immigrants. He argued that by helping blacks, whites were helping themselves, as African Americans made up 1/3 of the South's population and could do much to help with its economic growth. He believed that blacks would eventually gain political and social equality based on their economic achievements. Well, W.E.B. Du Bois dissented, and there is an older W.E.B. Du Bois when he ran for Senate, state of New York, back in 1950 as a socialist. Here's an activist. He disliked Washington's conciliatory philosophy and his belief that African Americans were only suited to vocational training. Du Bois criticized Washington for not demanding equality for African Americans as guaranteed by the 14th Amendment, and subsequently became an advocate for full and equal rights in every realm of a person's life. Frederick Douglass dies. Frederick Douglass is probably the father of the civil rights movement in the United States. Before Booker T. Washington ascended to the leadership of the civil rights movement, there was Frederick Douglass. Douglass died on February 20th. He was born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey around Valentine's Day, February 14, 1818, to an enslaved woman and an unidentified white male on Maryland's Eastern Shore, probably a slave owner, probably. During this time, he was exposed to the degradations of slavery, witnessing firsthand brutal whippings and spending much time cold and hungry. When he was 8, he was sent to Baltimore to live with a ship carpenter by the name of Hugh Auld. There he learned to read, and the first words, abolition and abolitionists, going to live in Baltimore. He heard those words, abolitionists and abolitionists. Douglass would later say that laid the foundation and opened the gateway to all my subsequent prosperity. On January 1st, 1836, Douglass made a resolution that he would be free by the end of the year. He planned an escape, but in early April he was jailed after his plan was discovered. 2 years later, while living in Baltimore, working at a shipyard, Douglass would finally realize his dream. He fled the city on September 3rd, 1838. Frederick Douglass. Traveling by train, then by steamboat, and then by train, he arrived in New York City the following day. Several weeks later, he settled in New Bedford, Massachusetts, living with his newlywed bride, whom he met in Baltimore and married in New York, and he has a new name. His name, Frederick Douglass. He joined various organizations in New Bedford, including a black church. He attended abolitionist meetings, subscribed to William Lloyd Garrison's weekly journal, The Liberator. 1841, he saw Garrison speak at the Bristol Anti-Slavery Society annual meeting. He was inspired by the speaker, later stating, "No face and form ever impressed me with such serious sentiments, the hatred of slavery, as those of William Lloyd Garrison." Garrison, too, was impressed with Douglass, mentioning him in The Liberator. And there is roughly Frederick Douglass around that time. Several days later, Douglass gave his speech at the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society annual convention in Nantucket. The speech described at the top of his page. One of the speech, one correspondent reported, flinty hearts were pierced and cold ones melted by his eloquence. Before leaving the island of Nantucket, Douglass was asked to become a lecturer for the society for 3 years. It was the launch of a career that would continue throughout Douglass's long life. In 1861, the nation erupted into civil war over the issue of slavery. Frederick Douglass worked tirelessly to make sure that emancipation would be one of the war's outcomes. He recruited black men to fight in the U.S. Army, including 2 of his sons, who served in the famous 54th Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry. When black troops protested, they were not receiving pay and treatment equal to that of the white troops. Douglass met with the President Abraham Lincoln to advocate on their behalf. There is Douglass. After the Civil War progressed and emancipation seemed imminent, Douglass intensified the fight for equal citizenship. He argued that freedom would be empty if the former enslaved were not guaranteed their rights and protections of American, and the protections of American citizens. After post-war amendments sought to make some of these tremendous changes, 13th Amendment, ratified in 1865, abolished slavery. The 14th Amendment, ratified in 1868, granted national birthright citizenship. And the 15th Amendment, ratified in 1870, stated nobody could be denied voting rights on the basis of race, skin, or previous servitude, except they could for gender. Women did not get the right to vote. So women were discriminated against at that time. Frederick Douglass. 1877, the President Rutherford B. Hayes appointed Douglass as the U.S. Marshal of the District of Columbia, making him the first African American to hold the position. In his capacity as U.S. Marshal, Douglass was not asked to perform one of the duties often assigned to the position to formally introduce visiting dignitaries to the President. America wasn't ready for that yet, a black man introducing the President to other dignitaries. 1899, President Benjamin Harrison appointed him as Minister to Haiti, a post he held until 1891. Those positions were among the highest African American men had been appointed to in the 20th century. 19th century, I'm sorry, 19th. In 1887, President Grover Cleveland replaced Frederick Douglass, a Republican serving as the recorder of deeds for Washington, D.C. The highest ranking African American in the country, with another black man, James Monroe Trotter of Mississippi, who escaped slavery to Ohio via the Underground Railroad. 1889, Harrison appointed him the minister to Haiti, and he was there. Douglass left behind a legacy from enslaved man to driving force of the abolitionist movement and ambassador to the Black Republic, Haiti. Douglass's funeral was held at the Metropolitan African Methodist Episcopalian Church in Washington, D.C. Thousands of people passed by his coffin to show their respect. United States senators and Supreme Court justices were pallbearers. A letter from women's voting rights leaders, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, was read. The secretary of the Haitian legation expressed condolences of his country in melodious French. Well, this is Grover Cleveland. He is the President of the United States, and well, he is in Atlanta, by the way, and doesn't really get too involved with the civil rights movement. For President Grover Cleveland, as it was for Booker T. Washington, the goal was to bring blacks, many of them less than a generation removed from slavery, into the fullness of American society. Just as Cleveland believed with Native Americans, the government should work to assimilate blacks completely into civilization. And the best way for black people to do that, he felt, was through educational opportunities. That's about it. Grover Cleveland did not push at all for civil rights. This is Brooklyn. Exploitation shows in Brooklyn, New York, 1895. During the summer, in a Brooklyn, New York park, there was a cotton plantation complete with 500 black workers reenacting slavery. Now, would you pay to go see black workers reenacting slavery? Maybe, maybe not. Acres of white cotton and hundred wood cabins housing 500 black workers. Cotton's picked from the stalk and brought over to the humming cotton gin. Women on porches chat over chores while keeping an eye on wandering children. The local preacher extols repentance to a backslider, and folks sing hymns in rare moments of leisure. Ticket holders were purchasing a full day's worth of entertainment for 25 cents, or about $9.50 today, or $1, $38 today. You could get a box seat, and they entered the Ambrose Park, a racetrack, transformed at the cost of the organizers to about $13,000 a week, $427,000 in today's money.
Before the performances, which changed weekly, visitors were free to walk around, a recreation of a plantation life imagined in sentimental minstrel songs circa 1848. There were other exploitation shows as well. Annie Oakley and the Wild West show reviews. This was the time for not only black minstrel type shows, but shoot 'em up cowboy versus Indian reenactments. Nate Salisbury, the funder behind Black America, as a successful producer and manager for Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. Annie Oakley and Chief Sitting Bull starred in Buffalo Bill's Wild West. The Wild West shows helped establish the classic settler colonial dramas, Cowboys versus Indians. By the way, the old TV shows and the old movies where you saw the Indians rounding themselves up in a circle, there's no evidence they ever did that. They were just recreating the old Wild West show. That was it. That's how they did it in the Wild West show. Women voting? Not in the United States. There were a couple of states that had voting, like Wyoming at the time, but general, women were third-class citizens in the United States in the 1890s. In fact, if you were a man in an insane asylum, you had more rights than the average woman back in the 1890s. Cleveland was mostly silent on the issue of women's suffrage. He understood the value of women's clubs and political organizations in drumming up the vote of husbands and fathers, but he was careful not to alienate either group by speaking out against female suffrage, nor did he speak in favor of it. His one stance in support of women's rights was to criticize polygamy. That's what he did. He criticized polygamy. Recovering from the panic of 1893. You hear a lot about tariffs today. 50% on the EU, maybe not. 145% on China, maybe not. 10% base tariffs all over the place, or 30%, whatever it is, it is. Well, tariffs nothing new in the United States. 1890, Congressman William McKinley got through the House the Tariff Act of 1890, which put tariffs on 1,500 products coming into the United States, and eventually caused the Depression of 1893. Grover Cleveland was blamed for the Depression, but the Depression happened during Benjamin Harrison's time as President of the United States. Cleveland took over on March 4th, 1893, but in February 1893, that's when the Depression hit. Gold reserves stored in the U.S. Treasury fell to a dangerously low level. In the depths of the panic in 1895, Wall Street banker J.P. Morgan demanded a meeting with Cleveland and was granted one. In this meeting, Morgan planned for the United States to sell 3.5 million ounces of gold to the British. This forced the president, Cleveland, to borrow $65 million in gold from J.P. Morgan and the Rothschilds banking family of England. J.P. Morgan's plan was a success. 30-year bonds were sent to England with no problem. It was the first time J.P. Morgan used his keen business knowledge for the good of the country. Wouldn't be the last, but he also did some other things that maybe weren't all that good. That's Hawaii. That's north of Honolulu. And there's a little plaque here that says Mark Twain was here, and he thought this was the most beautiful vista in Oahu, north of Honolulu. The U.S. started becoming interested in the country of Hawaii in the 1830s when the United States started importing sugarcane from Hawaii. The American sugarcane growers pushed the Hawaiian government to sign a reciprocal treaty with the U.S. in 1875 to lower tariffs on sugar cane being imported to the states. The McKinley Tariff, which I talked about, lowered the tariffs on sugar imported to the United States on all countries with the exception of the Kingdom of Hawaii. The sugarcane growers demanded that the Hawaiian government begin talks with the United States to lower the tariffs on Hawaiian sugarcane. The Queen, in 1893, announced plans for a new constitution. but she wasn't able to push it ahead because she's overthrown. January 14th, 1893, a group of mostly Euro-American business leaders and residents formed the Committee of Safety, the Sugar Lobby, to stage a coup d'etat against the kingdom and seek annexation by the United States. The United States government minister John L. Stevens, responding to a request from the Committee of Safety, summoned a company of U.S. Marines. That is the palace, which is still functioning as a government office today in Honolulu. A descendant of the American missionary community to Hawaii, Sanford B. Dole advocated the westernization and the destruction of not only the Hawaiian government, but Hawaiian culture. Get rid of it. Can't get laid anymore if you get there and they throw the lays on you. You can't watch hula dances anymore, I guess. Get rid of the Hawaiian alphabet. After the overthrow of the monarchy, he served as president of Hawaii until his government secured Hawaii's annexation by the United States. That is Dole. Looks like a guy from the Smith Brothers cough drops, doesn't it? American lawyer Sanford B. Dole became the president of the Republic when the provisional government of Hawaii ended on July 4th, 1894. What a coincidence. The 4th of July. Maybe not a coincidence. They wanted to be Americans. Controversy ensued in the following years as the Queen tried to regain her throne. And there is the Queen. The administration of Grover Cleveland commissioned the Blount Report, which concluded the removal of the Queen had been illegal. And the government demanded that the Queen be reinstated, but the provisional government said, hey, we're in charge now. Who are you, Grover Cleveland? We're in charge now, not you.
Who were they?
Who are they? They were
Who were the ones?
in Hawaii. They were basically the guys who grew sugar and pineapples, and they wanted.
Americans or?
They were Americans and Europeans.
Europeans.
Also, Americans and Europeans who happened to be living there, both. And they wanted the United States to take us. We don't want to pay the tariffs anymore. That's basically it. Take us. We're not paying the tariffs. There was something called the Wilcox Rebellion. That happened in January of 1895. Robert Wilcox was brought into a plot to overthrow the Republic, Dole's government, and return the Queen to her throne. Among the plotters were Samuel Nowlin, former head of the Royal Guards of Hawaii, Joseph Nawaha, a former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Chester T. Gulick, an advisor to the King and Queen, and William H. Rickard, a sugar planter of British parentage. These men planned to attack government buildings in downtown Honolulu at night. The Wilcox Rebellion, or the Counter-Revolution, was a brief war between January 6th and January 9th, and it was considered, that consisted of 3 battles on the island of Oahu, Republic of Hawaii, the last major military operation by loyalists who opposed the overthrow of the Hawaiian kingdom. All the royalist leaders were arrested, the barracks was converted into a prison to hold the captured rebels, and the Queen was arrested on January 16th. The Queen abdicates, it's all over. She basically sends this note saying, she solemnly swears in the presence of the Almighty Lord that I will support the Constitution, laws, and government of the Republic of Hawaii and will not, either directly or indirectly, encourage or assist in the restoration of the establishment of the monarchy form of government in the Hawaiian Islands. And she signs it, and that penmanship is, you don't see penmanship like that today. You don't see it. You could read every word, every letter you could see. I scribbled today, and I learned penmanship 60 years ago. I still scribble. Anyway, Wilcox was tried for treason by a military tribunal with the other military leaders. He was found guilty, sentenced to death, but the sentence was reduced to 35 years. She formally abdicates. She was briefly jailed, then paroled, and eventually pardoned. And the Hawaiian Republic continues. Grover Cleveland opposed the annexation of Hawaii. The Queen was overthrown in part because of the 1890 McKinley tariffs. which raised the import duty on Hawaiian sugar. The sugar plantation owners decided it would be in their best interest to overthrow the Queen and the Kingdom of Hawaii and be annexed by the United States. The United States started viewing Hawaii as a possible territory in 1842. That is the Cuban Independence movement and Martí, as in Radio Martí. In 1894, Spain canceled a trade pact between Cuba and the United States. The imposition of more taxes and trade restrictions prodded the economically distressed Cubans to launch the Cuban War of Independence, a resumption of an earlier struggle. The poet and journalist José Julián Martí, the ideological spokesman of the revolution, drew up plans for an invasion of Cuba while living in exile in New York City. Maximo Gómez y Baez, who commanded the rebel troops during the 10 Years' War, was among those who joined Martí's invasion force. Although Martí was killed and martyred in a battle about 1 month after the initiation of the invasion on April 11, Gómez and Antonio Maceo employed sophisticated guerrilla tactics in leading the Revolutionary Army to take control of the eastern region. On June 12th, Grover Cleveland issued a proclamation declaring the neutrality of the United States in the conflict between Cuba and Spain. Cleveland emphasized the U.S.'s obligation to remain neutral towards a friendly power, Spain. Well, in 1823, there was a Monroe Doctrine, which basically warned any European power, if they tried to take over something in the northern hemisphere, or the southern hemisphere, western hemisphere, they would be met with resistance. Cleveland did not do that. He allowed this to go on. In September, Gómez and Maceo declared the Republic of Cuba and sent Maceo's forces to invade the western provinces. The rebels believed that they had to take the war to the western provinces, which included Havana, which contained the island's government and wealth. Here's the first X-ray. This is the first X-ray. I remember seeing X-rays of broken things I had, like a broken finger here, and it showed the break, clear. But in 1895, this is revolutionary. On November 8th, at the University of Würzburg, Germany, physicist William Conrad Röntgen accidentally discovered new and unknown X-rays while testing electrical discharges in glass vacuum tubes. His tubes were covered in heavy black paper, but incandescent green light still escaped and projected on a nearby fluorescent screen. He found that the mysterious light would pass through most substances but leave shadows of solid objects. He called them X to underscore, I don't know what this is about. What is this? That's the X in X-rays. He discovered X-rays would pass through the human tissue as well, rendering the bones and tissues visible. Well, how many of you have gone to the movies in your life? You've gone to the movies, seen movies and all. Well, the technology that made it possible for you to go to the movies starts actually in 1895. And that is called the Panopticon. On April 12th, Woodville Latham and his sons Otway and Gray demonstrated their first movie projector developed in the United States. Although motion pictures had been shown in the United States for several years using Thomas Edison's kinescope, films could only be viewed one at a time in a peep show box, not projected to a large audience. So now you can all you sit there, you can see a screen like this. Gray and Otway Latham, the founders of the company that produced and exhibited films of prize fighting using kinescope, called on their father Woodville and W.K.L. Dixon, an assistant in the Edison laboratory, to help them develop a device that would project life-size images on the screen in order to attract larger audiences. The first commercial public screening of cinematographic films occurred on May 20th at 156 Broadway, New York City. That June, the Woodville Latham lab officially requested patent for the projecting kinescope. So that starts it. Meanwhile, in France, it's actually a movie projector. The cinematic graphy, inspired by the kinescope exhibit in Paris. Another pair of brothers, the Frenchmen Auguste and Louis Lumiere, would invent their own motion picture projector, the cinematography, by the end of the year. This guy's the first football player, first pro football player. He's all 16 years old. He's in high school. His name is John Braylier, and he's a quarterback, and became the first player to openly turn pro. He accepted $10, $345 in expenses to play for the Latrobe, Pennsylvania YMCA against the Jeanette Athletic Club. He had played for Indiana Normal, Indiana University of Pennsylvania, even though in high school, and then committed to playing for Washington and Jefferson University. He was not supposed to play in this game. The quarterback was Eddie Blair of Latrobe, but he had another engagement that day. He played baseball for Greenberg, and Latrobe manager Dave Barrett was anxious to have a player take his place so he could win the game against the Jeanette Indians. Van Cortlandt Park, still there, right at the terminal of the 4 train on Jerome Avenue. It's still there. When Van Cortlandt Park Golf Course opened on July 6th in the Bronx, the popularity of the sport had been growing steadily. The course came about when a group of local businessmen in Riverdale, T. McClure Peters, B.W. Gus Schwab, Moses T. Percy Pine, and Cleveland H. Dodge had tried to unsuccessfully find private lands within New York City large enough to accommodate a new grand-scale golf course. It was a 9-hole course. At the time, most American golf courses were private, especially all of those in Westchester, and held the right to control who could play. The Van Cortlandt Park course broke new ground. As the game of golf opened up to the public, its popularity soared. The average New York resident, or New Jersey, if you want to come over by ferry, could tee up alongside celebrities, and new golfers organized clubs to further their enjoyment of the game. Volleyball. And this is the guy who invented volleyball. His name is William Morgan. William Morgan arrived at the Holyoke YMCA, Western Massachusetts, as physical director in August, and he had a problem. The newly created game of basketball, which was in Springfield, was popular with the kids, but it was too strenuous for local businessmen. He couldn't run up and down the court. He needed an alternative, something that these older gentlemen, like 30 years old, could play. Something without too much bumping or jolting. It had to be a sport, Morgan said, with a strong athletic impulse, but no physical contact. So he borrowed. From basketball, he took a ball. From tennis, he took a net. The use of hands and the ability to play off walls and overhangs, he borrowed from handball. And from baseball, he took the concept of innings. The game was volleyball, spelled 2 words in those days. Morgan turned the game over to the YMCA to use as they saw fit. A prize for motors. How many would you like to race in that kind of car? America's first auto race was held in Chicago on Thanksgiving Day, November 28th. The idea was, it was the idea of H.H. Colsett, the publisher of the Chicago Times-Herald, hoping to promote this new industry and sell more papers. He announced on July the 9th a prize for motors with a $5,000 purse, $190,000 today, for investors who can construct practical, self-propelling road carriages. The race was originally planned to run from Chicago to Milwaukee, which is about 90 miles. But bad roads north of Racine forced to shorten the course, and it became a 54-mile course from Chicago to Evanston, Illinois, and back. Almost 80 entrants had been promised, but only 11 agreed to run in such weather, and just 6 cars made it to the start line. 2 of the cars finished. The imported and modified Benz of Hieronymus Muller and Company of Decatur, Illinois, driven by son Oscar, and Duryea, built and driven by Frank Duryea. The Duryea crossed the finish line 7 hours, 53 minutes later with an average speed of 7 miles an hour. And good luck trying to get those cars stopped. And we finish with America the Beautiful. How many of you know the song America the Beautiful?
Yeah.
You all do. Do you know it was written by two different people at two different places? Somebody decided to put the words together along with the music. Anyway, Kathleen Lee Bates, she wrote the words in 1895, and Collier wrote the rest of it in the 20th century. America the Beautiful, lyrics written by Catherine Lee Bates, and its music composed by church organist and choir master Samuel A. Ward at the Grace Episcopalian Church in Newark, New Jersey. The two never met. Bates wrote the words as a poem entitled Pike's Peak, 1895, and Ward wrote the music back in 1883. The poem and music paired together in 1910. So there is Booker T. Washington, and we'll talk a little bit about the legacy from that year. He was probably the most influential black man in America in the late 1800s. But he's also remembered also as subservient and even a sellout. His Atlantic Compromise speech cautioned blacks against extremism and encouraged them to prove their worth by becoming productive members of society. He was also a presidential advisor, or as the first leader of one of the country's well-known historic black schools, Tuskegee Normal and Industrial Institute east of Montgomery, Alabama. In a debate with Du Bois, Washington saw the benefits of gradual progress, while W.E.B. Du Bois wanted more direct, immediate action. Du Bois would be one of the founders of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People in 1909. Douglass died of a heart attack February 20th after attending a meeting of the National Council of Women in Washington, D.C. Throughout his life, he remained a vigilant activist, agitator, and supporter of human rights. He was one of the few men who attended the 1848 Seneca Falls Convention as the first, which was the first women's rights convention. Its organizers advertised it as a convention to discuss the social, civil, and religious condition and the rights of women. Again, there's Stone Mountain. That's an even better look at the monument, which includes Jefferson Davis and Robert E. Lee. During the 1890s, Confederate General Robert E. Lee and Confederate memorials became much more than public symbols of the lost cause history. New generation of white Southerners were determined to celebrate the cause of their parents and maintain a distinctive Southern cultural identity. Several former Confederate states established Robert E. Lee Day to celebrate his birthday. Museums dedicated to Confederate history were created in Columbia, South Carolina, and Richmond, Virginia. Some of the memorials, like the Lee statue in New Orleans, have been removed, and that's caused a fight in the American cultural wars.
What were these women called?
What, the daughters of the Confederacy?
Oh, is that what they were called?
This is the legacy. Grover Cleveland was blamed for the Panic of 1893. Cleveland decides he's not going to run for re-election in 1896. William McKinley was the cause, major cause of the Depression in 1893 with his tariffs. He's elected president in 1896. Go figure. The guy who caused the Depression is the guy who's going to be brought in to help end the Depression. Honolulu. The United States annexed Hawaii in 1898. 1900, the territory of Hawaii was granted self-governance and retained the Iolani Palace as a territorial capital building. Plantation owners and capitalists who maintained control through financial institutions found territorial status convenient because they remained able to import cheap foreign labor. Such immigration and labor practices were prohibited in many states. 1960, Hawaii becomes the United States' 50th state. The annexation of Hawaii to the United States made selling agricultural products to the mainland much more profitable since they would not be subject to import tariffs. Eventually, tourism became Hawaii's biggest industry. Hawaii became the 50th state in 1960. The Queen composed Aloha Oi, which is widely considered Hawaii's most famous song. She wrote it in 1878. The song is also known as Farewell to Thee. You know the song Farewell to Thee, has become a beloved Hawaiian composition and is recognized both within and outside the islands. There is Fidel Castro. The United States and Cuba have had a complicated relationship since the 1850s, when the Americans wanted to buy the land from Spain, or the island from Spain, and turn it into a slave state. The United States declared war in 1898. The Americans won, picked up Guam, Puerto Rico, and eventually the Philippines and Cuba. Cuba was granted independence in 1902, but the United States remained influential. In 1959, Fidel Castro overthrew the Cuban government and aligned himself with the Soviet Union. Since then, there's been limited relations between the two countries. America's Guantanamo Bay Naval Base remains open on the island. That's that's an MRI. While X-rays remain a cornerstone of modern medicine, the discovery paved the way for the development of today's broad spectrum of imaging techniques, including MRI, also computed tomography, CT, CAT scans, along with ultrasound and echocardiology and others. Some of these methods avoid the use of radiation. Theaters, projected movies were first shown to paying audiences in New Orleans at the Vitoscope Hall on July 26, 1896, as part of a vaudeville show. The first theater devoted solely to projected movies was the Electric Theater in Los Angeles, opened in 1902. Less than a year after the Latham's demonstrations, Thomas Arment used a method similar to the Latham loop to develop a state-of-the-art projector he would sell to Edison, who marketed the machines as the Vitoscope. The Super Bowl is the biggest one-day sports spectacular, or maybe not even sports spectacular in the United States, just a spectacular. It's the most popular sport in America. The second National Football League, which started as the American Professional Football Conference in 1920, became the NFL July 24th, 1922, is the most successful professional sports league in America, taking in billions of dollars every year. The NFL's crown jewel, the Super Bowl, is annually the most watched TV show in America. Well, that's what they wear for volleyball today, not what they did back in Massachusetts. Volleyball is an Olympic sport. Golf and volleyball. The name volleyball was changed to volleyball, one word. In 1952, they were Olympic sports. The Chicago car race got people very interested in the car business. The Duryea brothers began commercial production of cars. They sold 13 cars by the end of 1896. And we leave with America the Beautiful. At various times, there have been efforts to give America the Beautiful legal status as either the national hymn or the national anthem, equal to or in place of the Star-Spangled Banner, but so far this has not succeeded. Proponents prefer America the Beautiful for various reasons, saying it's easier to sing. And my wife, who has sung national anthems at Madison Square Garden, at Shea Stadium, she sung one for Bill Clinton once in 1992, told me that Star-Spangled Banner is a very difficult song to sing. And more adaptive to new orchestrations while still remaining easily recognizable as the Star-Spangled Banner. But nothing has come of this. Anyway, thank you so much. Any questions, any comments on the year?